So probably and the post-independence, there were certain acts and rules which were introduced. The first and foremost important one was the Factories Act, which was introduced in the year 1948. Basically, it emphasizes on the indoor air quality, particularly in the industries, like so that it doesn't affect the health of the workers who are working there. Okay, so there we can find the mention of the air quality in the industries, and then came the Mines Act in the year 1958. In fact, these acts are still being being followed, but on an amended version. Okay, Mines Act dealt with the air pollution and the dust nuisance in the mining activity and all. And then the River Boards Act, which came, which spoke about the water sharing and all. The Merchant Shipping Act, again, which dealt with the pollution which is happening due to the cargo ships and all. So these were the some of the important environmental laws which were existing in India after independence. But actually, many of you maybe heard about this, the latest, the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, or the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, or the Environmental Protection Act, which Dr. Rekha Madam was mentioning. All these the acts and rules which were very specific to the environmental protection, they came only after the 1970s. These are because of an international conference which was held in Stockholm, Sweden. That was in the year 1972. It was famously called as UN Conference on Human Environment, which was held between 5th to 16th of 1972 in Sweden. Probably many of you, you may wonder why the World Environmental Day is being celebrated on 5th of June every year. It's for the very reason that this conference was started on the day 5th of June. Okay. In fact, this was the first conference which gave a global recognition for preserving the environment. They said there is a requirement for preserving and protecting our environment. In fact, this conference was attended by our late Prime Minister, then Prime Minister Srimati Indira Gandhi ji, and she also emphasized that the pollution or the poverty is the biggest polluter. You would have read in the newspapers and all. It's a major statement given by her. As the poverty increases, the pollution also increases. So she said there is a need to support the developing or the underdeveloped countries by the developed countries to prevent or to remove the poverty, so that they also improve in terms of environment. Okay, so in this conference, even the United Nations Environment Program was also formed. Um, Apart from this was the first requirement why in India this modern environmental laws came into existence. Apart from that, we have our own constitutions, and in our constitutions there are certain provisions or the articles which emphasized on the environmental protection. For example, the Article 21. So Article 21 speaks of rights, fundamental rights of Indian citizen. So one of the clauses in Article 21 says right to life. It says no person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty. So in fact, this statement was further expanded by the Honorable Supreme Court, and it said the personal life or personal liberty, it says it is right to clean and pollution free environment. Okay, so it is the duty of the Indian government to see that the each Indian person or citizen is entitled to a clean and pollution free environment. So apart from that, there is Article 48A, which was introduced after this UN conference, the Stockholm conference. It says the state shall endeavor. State means country. The country shall endeavor to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forests and wildlife of the country. It was an amendment brought after that conference. And then the Article 51A. So Article 51 actually it speaks about fundamental duties of the citizen of India. Okay, one of the clauses in that article, it says it shall be the duty of every citizen of the India to protect and improve the natural environment, including the forests, lakes, rivers, etc. Okay, so all these constitutional requirements, they in fact made the government to introduce the environmental laws in India. Apart from that, by 1970s, there was a discussion on the sustainable management or sustainable development of the society. This beautiful Earth, which is about 4.6 billion years old, around about 460 crore years old actually. So the modern human, he came very very recently. In fact, if you consider the earth was evolved about one day, that is 24 hours back, the man came into existence just in the last one tenth of a last second. Okay, that was the man existence. And the modern man who came just about 300 to 400 years, who introduced the industrialization. So today we are speaking of the management. The earth had its own the system of correcting itself. For example, we have already learnt about the hydrogen cycle, the nitrogen cycle, or the carbon cycle. It had its own mechanism of correcting itself. So even though there was some natural disaster like some volcano or forest fire which used to create some pollution, though it had its own mechanism to clean it up. Whereas with the introduction of industrial revolution or the industrial man-made pollutants, okay, so all these problems started. The economic and social the economic and social development of man, they started troubling the ecological balance. Okay, so that's why there was a talk of sustainable management and sustainable development, which also led to the creation of the modern environmental laws. So this is a small, pictorial representation of how the countries are progressing. You can see the developed countries. It's a just assumption, like if everybody lives like a developed country man or a citizen of a developed country, so probably one Earth would not be sufficient for the entire global population to sustain. For example, if everybody in the world lives like an American, we need probably 5 Earths to sustain the mankind. So fortunately, we can see the Indian rating is zero point 0.6. That means we are well below the average of world, and our culture and our way of living is far better compared to the developed countries. But unfortunately, we are also getting westernized, and our we are also becoming a part of our pollution problems. Sorry. Apart from that, there were certain global problems. Probably you would have learned in your college studies or even in engineering also. I'm not sure. The acid rains, the greenhouse effects of the global warming, and then the ozone layer depletion, the population, increase in population. Today's population is something like 6.5 billion, 650 crores or 700 crores probably. So population, which led to the shortage of water and food in the world, the endemic diseases. So the best example is COVID-19. Probably no one, probably 1 year back, we never knew what was COVID-19. Okay, and then the threat of nuclear weapons. Likewise, there was so many global problems faced by the global community, which led to the development of this modern environmental laws. Among all these things, we consider this air pollution as a global problem, major global problem, because air pollution doesn't have any boundaries. Like a pollution caused here may affect a neighboring country like Pakistan or Sri Lanka, we don't know, depending on the air movement, wind movement and all. Okay, so we'll be just learning about these problems in 1 or 2 slides, and then we will be going to the actual Indian scenario. Probably acid rains you would have already learned in your college. This basically created because of the pollutants like sulfur dioxide and oxides of nitrogen, which are byproducts of the fossil fuel burning. Okay, sulfur dioxide is basically due to the fossil fuel burning, and that is by industries and all. And basically the nitrogen oxides are basically from the vehicular emissions. The rainwater, actual pure rainwater pH is something like 5.6. It is basically because the rainwater already contains it's slightly acidic because it already contains the weak carbonic acid, which is a result of the naturally occurring carbon dioxide dissolved in the rainwater. Okay, That's why its pH is something like 5.6. Whenever the pH goes below 5.6, we generally call it as a acid rain, which is basically due to these pollutants. For example, the oxides of nitrogen dissolves in rainwater to give nitric oxide, HNO3, and sulfur dioxide gives to sulfuric acid, so on and so forth. Okay, so probably there are instances of rainwater everywhere throughout the world. Even in India also, we have witnessed certain rainwater. Sorry, the acid rains. Actually, the best example is the first rain, or what we call as the Mungaru Mele, the first rain which happens after the summer. So you can probably, I keep telling the students, you can collect the samples of the first rainwater and try to check the pH. Definitely it will be less than 5.6 or less than the pure rainwater. It's basically because it dissolves all the pollutants in the air, and which results in a slight form of acid rains. Okay, so as I said, it's a global problem. We can see, like, some the industrialization or the pollution caused in some of the industrialized countries is causing acid rain problems elsewhere. We can see acid rain somewhere in the something like Alaska, where nothing is there. There are no industries at all in Alaska, or the upper Russia and all, where there is no industrial activity, but still we can witness the acid rain problems because of the activities in America and Europe, etc. Okay, that's why we call it as a global environmental problem. The other, before going to this, the effects of acid rains. One is, you would have learned. So the acid rains create, actually, it leaches the main the topsoil nutrients in the topsoil. That thus it makes the topsoil infertile. Okay, so that reduces the yield of the crop and all. Okay, and then it can even reduce the pH of the water bodies, thereby affecting the aquatic life. And then it can even destroy the monuments. The best example is our Taj Mahal. Okay, so these things probably would have learned in your college course and all. And then comes the important discussion on the global warming. So people call it as global warming also. It is, in simple words, it is the increase of the mean temperature of the globe or the earth. This is basically due to the increase in the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. Okay, the carbon dioxide has a very unique character. It allows the long wavelength radiations from the sun, whereas whatever the short wavelength radiations, heat radiations, which are refracted from the earth's surface, the carbon dioxide traps it. So it traps the heat radiations, thereby the earth keeps on getting warmer and warmer with the increase in carbon dioxide levels, which is again a product of our uh, air pollution, or the burning of fossil fuels and all. Okay, so what happens this, so these are some of the global greenhouse gas emissions. Basically, the major pollutant is the carbon dioxide, which is from fossil fuel, as well as the forest fires and all. And next we have even methane also. Methane is a very big pollutant, because it has a more greenhouse gas, greenhouse global warming potential compared to carbon dioxide. It is almost 21 times more harmful than carbon dioxide, though its quantity is less. And methane is a major byproduct which is from the animal husbandry and all. Okay, so that is also causing a lot of problems. The oxides of nitrogen, the fluorine gas based gases, they're all causing problems. So as I said, the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere before industrialization, that was in the 18th century, it was about 280 ppm, and today we are something like 400 ppm or 420 ppm exactly. So this is the increase in the carbon dioxide levels in the global scenario. Rather than ppm, we have to observe the in terms of volume. Okay, CO2 emission in terms of billion tons. So it was something like about 2 billion tons in 1750, and today we are speaking of about 38-39 billion tons. Okay, there is a manifold increase in the carbon dioxide emissions, which is resulting in the global warming. Okay, the global temperature before industrialization, it was something like minus zero point 0.4 or zero point 0.6, and today the average global temperature is about 1 degree centigrade. Okay, so you may think 1 degree centigrade is very less, but even the 1 degree centigrade, the minus zero point 0.6 to 1 degree centigrade is a huge change in terms of the global mean temperature. So these are the countries which are contributing to global carbon dioxide emissions. We have China, US, and even India is not far behind. European Union is there, and India is also a major contributor. But only thing in terms of GDP or per capita carbon dioxide emissions, probably US stands first because of its richer or very developed nature of society. So you may ask, what will happen if temperature increase? The biggest problem is, as you have probably read, most of the water which is on the earth is about 70% water, and 75% water and 25% land. Okay, approximately like that, no? So most of the water on the earth is stored in the polar regions, in the form of ice. Okay, so as there is an increase in the global temperature, with the increase in global temperature, the ice starts melting, resulting in the increase in the mean sea level of the globe. Okay, scientists have already predicted from the past 50 years, the mean sea level has already risen by about 20 to 30 centimeters. So they say at in the present trend, the mean sea level rise is about something like 4 centimeter to 5 centimeter per year. uh, 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 so it's a very alarming thing actually. So assuming that, probably there are certain countries, like there are certain small islands. The best example is our Maldives, which is located on the southern side of India. It is considered as the paradise on earth, with beautiful islands and all. Many Indians and foreigners, they go for honeymoon. They're such beautiful islands, but the problem is most of those islands, they are just about 1 to 2 meters above the mean sea level. Okay, so probably with this kind of a sea level increase, maybe next 30 to 40 years, or maybe in 100 years, if the same kind of sea level increase, if it is witnessed, probably these Maldives may not be there. So we can see there are a lot of red dots here. So it indicates these are the potential areas which may be affected due to the sea level rise. Many of our coastal regions probably may get submerged, resulting in a lot of problems. Okay, so this is the problem with the global warming, or the we can also call it as a global greenhouse effect. So why we call it as a greenhouse effect means, so if you probably would have entered into a greenhouse, or a house, where a poly house, where the vegetables or the floriculture houses and all, you would have entered. So you can witness the same type of phenomena there also, though it is not a green colored house. Since the greens are grown there, so you can, as soon as you enter there, because of that similar kind of a phenomena, as soon as you enter, you can feel the warmth inside the greenhouse. That's why we call it as a greenhouse effect. So next global problem is the ozone layer depletion. You would have learnt about what is this ozone and all. Ozone is basically O3. Okay, oxygen, three molecules of oxygen, and we call ozone as a good ozone as well as a bad ozone. So some places ozone is considered as beneficial, in some places it is considered as harmful. For example, ozone at this level, that is at our the ground level, or the troposphere, what we call. Okay, the ozone in the troposphere, or where we live, it is considered as a bad ozone. Actually, ozone is result, it is a pollutant which is really, which is formed due to photochemical oxidation of the vehicular emissions. Okay, so at ground level we consider ozone as a bad ozone, whereas we can find a ozone layer in the stratosphere at a height of about 20 to 30 kilometers above the ground level. There, the ozone is considered as a beneficial ozone or a good ozone. Okay, so actually the whole, if you consider the ozone, the concentration of ozone in the 20 to 30 kilometer zone, it is something like 300 Dobson units. Okay, it's a unit actually to measure the ozone. So you may wonder how much is this 300 Dobson. So probably if you just compress that whole ozone into a small this one using some compressor, that 300 Dobson units comes to about just 3 mm. You know, it's much thinner than your mobile phone and all. So that is the thickness of the ozone layer present in the stratosphere. You know, in the year 1985, a scientist by name Dobson, actually by his name is only this Dobson unit has been introduced. He found out that the ozone layer is getting thinned. He made a study in Antarctica, and he said the ozone layer is getting depleted. It has come down to something like 100 Dobson units because of some pollutants. So we'll discuss what are those pollutants. They are called as ozone depleting substances. Oh, he said there is a need to control those ozone depleting substances. They are basically the chlorofluorocarbons. Okay, they are the chlorine containing the elements which are basically used in the refrigerants or the aerosols, even the fire extinguishers. There are certain pesticides which contain these ozone layer depleting substances and all. You know, this ozone, it is acting as a umbrella. You know, it protects the earth from the harmful UV radiations which is coming from the sun. Okay, so if the ozone layer depletes, means definitely it will going to affect, cause a lot of health problems to the human beings and the animals on the earth. Okay, so with all these global problems and all, there were certain international convention treaties which happened in the world. First and foremost was in the year 1971. There was a convention in a place called Ramsar. Ramsar is in it's a place in Iran. There was a convention on protection of wetlands. Wetlands means the lakes. Okay, the lakes or the water bodies, what we call, or the estuaries. So how to control and protect our wetlands. So that convention was held in the year 1971, and many countries signed the convention and protocol. Okay, then as I said, the major environmental conference was held in the year 1972. That was UN Conference on Human Environment, which was held in Stockholm, Sweden. And then there was a conference, the convention in 1985 at Vienna, followed by a protocol in 1987, which was called as Montreal Protocol. Since it was held in Montreal, it was with respect to controlling the or stopping or prohibiting the ozone depleting substances. Okay. In fact, this protocol is considered as so far was the best protocol in the world, because most countries accepted, signed the protocol, and in fact they today in fact the studies have said that the ozone has come back to its original position of 300 Dobson units. Okay, so that's why this considered as this protocol has been hailed as a most successful protocol among all the international protocols. Then we have in the year 1989 the Basel Convention on control of hazardous transponder movement of hazardous waste and their disposal. You know, the earlier practice was like the developed countries used to dump their waste into the developed or the poor countries. Okay, so this convention which was held in Basel, so it spoke about, or there was an agreement on how to control or how to restrict the movement of the hazardous waste in the from country to country. Okay, and then there was a famous summit which was called as a Earth Summit, with which occurred in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. That was in the year 1992, which was a major summit on the climate change. Okay, this was also called as United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Probably you can learn all these things on the internet and all. Okay, so which is considered as a very important summit or a convention in terms of climate change. And almost all countries of the world, about 190 countries attended the conference and ratified the agreement what was there in the commit, which was followed again in the year 1997, which is a continuation of the Rio Earth Summit. Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto is a place in Japan actually. So in fact, till 2020, we are still following the Kyoto Protocol. Okay, it was in fact Kyoto Protocol was in existence till 2012. Again, it was extended till 2020. Okay. Um, Probably you would have heard about this Paris Agreement on climate change, which was signed in the year 2015. Okay, probably very recently the the existing American president, Mr. Donald Trump, he withdrew America from this Paris Agreement on climate change. Okay, in fact, this Paris Agreement was signed by the then American President, Barack Obama. Basically this agreement says like the developed countries, it said, as I said, the global mean temperature is about 1 degree centigrade at present. So this agreement aim to keep the global temperature below 2 degrees centigrade by the end of this century. That is, by 2100 the global temperature should not exceed 2 degrees centigrade. Okay, so in that way we have to control the carbon dioxide emissions. That means we have to control the industrialization. Okay, so in fact this was agreed by then President Mr. Obama, but later Mr. Donald Trump said, I will not we will not be a part of Paris Agreement. Okay, in fact he said, he announced in the year 2016 itself, 2016 or 2017, and very recently last 6th of November, officially America is out of this Paris Agreement actually. Now, the one reason was, they have to cut down the industrialization, which means they have to cut down the development to certain extent. The other major problem was like the agreement says, the developed countries, okay, from the year 2021 to 25, for the next 5 years, all these developed countries have to create a climate, green climate fund, okay, of about $100 billion every year. Okay, each developed country has to deposit to a green climate fund of about $100 per year, so which will be distributed to the developed countries and the small island countries to cater to their needs to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions. However, this was one of the major reasons why Mr. Donald Trump withdrew from it. In fact, fortunately, the next president-elect, Mr. Joe Biden, has said he will again rejoin the Paris Agreement, which is a good indication. Okay. In fact, India is already a party to Paris Agreement. Okay, and then we have the Stockholm Convention on persistent organic chemicals, which was held in the year 2001. Actually, there were certain organic pollutants which were persistent in nature. That means which never degraded. Actually, one of the biggest or well-known POP is this DDT. Okay, which is very widely used. DDT was invented in the year 1940 actually, which was basically used in World War II. It was majorly used for control of malaria and typhoid, such kind of to control the insects. It was basically used as an insecticide, and then it found its use even in the agricultural field also. So they were all considered as persistent organic chemicals. Initially, there were only 12. Actually, people used to refer them as dirty dozen. Okay, a dozen pollutants which were very dirty in nature. In fact, later many more were added. Okay, they were basically causing the biomagnification. They never degraded, thereby magnifying itself in the food chain as well as in the human body. Many were carcinogenic, many were mutagenic and all. So that's why the global community felt that we have to control them. In fact, many have been, very recently you would have read in the newspapers, India banned about 6, 7 chemicals in last month. Okay, some of the chemicals which were listed in this Stockholm Convention, India banned them. In fact, DDT, DDT, India, still DDT is being used. DDT in some of the Western countries, it has been already banned production and all, including China. But in India, we are using DDT. But in India, use of DDT for agricultural activity has been banned. So we are just using only for the it is being used as a insecticide for control of malaria, dengue, all these things. Okay. So this is one of the conventions. These are some of the international agreements and conventions and treaties. So with all this background, let's come to the environmental laws which are implemented in India. Okay. So this is the first and foremost modern environmental law which came into existence in India. That was in the year 1974. This was after the UN Stockholm Conference. So the India first act enacted was in the year 1974. So under this act only, actually, it spoke about prevention and control of pollution of the water bodies in the country. Okay. So under this, actually, the Central Pollution Control Board was created. The state pollution control boards were created, and they were interested with the prevention and control of pollution of the water bodies. Then there was an act in the year 1974-77, which was called as a cess act, where the polluter or the industries which were polluting, they were penalized, or there was a tax introduced, cess introduced on the based on the polluter pays principle. Okay. In fact, this was repealed very recently. And then we have in the year 1981, the Air Act was introduced in the country to control and prevent the air pollution. Okay. And then in the year 1984, a very important event happened in India. Probably you are aware of the Bhopal gas tragedy, which happened in the year 1984, December 3rd and 4th. Okay. So Bhopal gas tragedy, there was a, huge chemical leakage of a toxic chemical by name methyl isocyanate in a company called Union Carbide. Okay. Union Carbide company, which was manufacturing the pesticides and all. So there was a leakage which resulted in death of more than 5,000 people. So then the government felt that the pollution is not only water pollution. Pollution means not only air pollution. So we need to have a broader act or a broader rule to control or to cover all kinds of pollution, the environmental pollutions. Okay. So that's why in the year 1986, this Environmental Protection Act was introduced. And this is considered as an umbrella act, because under this there are so many acts and rules which were enacted later on. For example, there was an act in the year 1989 itself. So as I said, there was a Basel Convention for transport movement of hazardous waste in the year 1989. During that year itself, a act was introduced in the country, that was in the year 1989, for the control of hazardous waste pollution and all, which was again amended in the year 2008. And then now we have this 2016 version of the hazardous waste rules. Okay. Then we had a rule on the control of pollution of e-waste, electronic waste. Okay. Which was introduced in the year 2011, and 2016 it was modified. We are following the 2016 rules now. There was a separate rule on the batteries. Okay. Management of the lead acid batteries. Lead is a major problem, actually. The batteries which we use in the the car batteries, or on our inverters or the railways, they all use lead. Okay. So the lead acid batteries, there was a separate rule. And then there was a rule in the year 1989 on the import and manufacture, storage and import of hazardous chemicals. uh, uh, and then probably you would have heard about this, the Environmental Impact Assessment Notification, which was introduced in the year 2006. In fact, we had the earlier version of 1996 itself. In the 2006, it came with a modified version, which basically requires certain major industries to be approved, to be they need to obtain the environmental clearance from the government by following certain procedures and all. Then we have a rule to control the pollution from the biomedical waste. Okay. Which is basically generated in the hospitals or the healthcare facilities. This rule was introduced way back in 1998 itself, and then which was modified in the year 2016, which we are following now. We have a separate rule for noise pollution control, which was introduced in the year 2000. And then we have a very important rule on the municipal solid waste, the garbage problem, which is a very rampant problem in the, particularly in the urban centers and all. So it was introduced in the year 2000 itself, and 2016 a modified version came. And then sorry, we have the plastic waste management rules in the year 2016, and then the ODS rules in 2000. Likewise, we have so many rules and regulations which have been enacted in India and which are being implemented. So basically, most of these rules and regulations are being implemented by the state pollution control boards. Okay, and most of these rules and regulations, they have the same waste hierarchy. Like the first option is to prevent the waste generation or the minimize the waste generation. If it is not possible, try to reuse the waste or recycle, or try to recover the energy. If nothing is possible, the ultimate option is to go for a disposal. Okay, that is the ultimate option. This is a small scenario of how the state pollution control board is implementing. In 1974 we started with one act and rule implementation, that was Water Act. Then by 1980 we had six, 1990 11, and present day we have something like 22 acts and rules which are being implemented. Okay, so you may wonder how this pollution control board is functioning. Probably at the center we have the Ministry of Environment and Forest, which is now called as Ministry of Environment and Forests and Climate Change, which has been introduced now after the climate change, Paris Climate Change Agreement and all. Now it is called as the Ministry of Climate Change also. Okay, so then we have Central Pollution Control Board, MOFCC, and Central Pollution Control Board at central government level. They are basically rule making bodies. They make the rules which will be applicable throughout the countries. And at the state level we have Department of Forest Ecology and Environment, as well as the state pollution control boards, which basically implement the rules and regulations which are formed by the government. Okay, so as I said, I think in this probably we will be discussing some salient features of this Water Act 1974, and then this Air Act 1981, and then under this Environmental Protection Act we will be discussing something about this hazardous waste, and then this e-waste rules. Okay, uh, and then EIA notification, biomedical waste rules, municipal solid waste rules, and plastic rules. Because as I said, each rules and regulations probably it takes about 2 to 3 hours for a for discussions and all. We'll be just touching upon only the salient features of each rules and regulations and their objectives. Okay, as I said, the first and foremost act which is being implemented by State Pollution Control Board is the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act. As the act itself says, our first objective is to prevent the pollution, then control. If prevention is not possible, control. Okay, so this act is its basic objective is to maintain and restore the wholesomeness of the water in the country. Okay, there are various sections of the act which we will not be dealing with all the rules and regulations. Probably if we start dealing with that, it gets bored. Only some important salient features I'll highlight here. For example, Section 4 says how should be the state pollution control boards, what should be constitution, and Section 17 gives the functions of our state board, what are all our functions. And we have Section 24 which says no person, including an individual person, it says no person shall cause or permit any poisonous or noxious polluting matter for discharging into stream or well. It's a very classic case actually. Very recently, this Bellandur lake pollution, you would have read in the newspapers and all. In fact, we closed down many industries. We took action against many industries and all. And there were some small houses, like individual houses and small apartments, which were causing the air pollution, which were causing the water pollution of the lake. In fact, we were we had not taken any action against them. Then the court in fact interpreted this rule. They said your rule says no person shall shall cause or discharge any poisonous matter, polluting matter into the water bodies. That means even individual house is responsible. So the pollution control board is bound to take action against the individual houses also. In fact, you may wonder, in fact, we took action against certain houses also, individual houses also. We directed, government to cut off the power supply to the individual houses. Okay. So that is the depth of this Water Act 1974. Okay. These are certain guidelines. In fact, there are certain penal provisions also. If you fail to comply with the provisions of the Water Act, you may be penalized by with a fine as well as imprisonment for about 1.5 years. So all these things are there. Basically, we file cases against the industries. Okay, industries are the defaulters. Okay, so and under the Water Act we have we generally, as I said, our first intention objective is to prevent the pollution, which probably is a major part. So apart from that, we have to control the pollution. Okay, control means there is a type of agreement between the industries as well as the government or the pollution control board, where we consent the industries to discharge the effluents with certain standards. Okay, for example, we have a standard for sewage like this. Okay, for the sewage, you need to have the discharge standards. We have certain parameters like pH, the biochemical oxygen demand, COD, the total suspended solids. Probably you would have learnt all these things in your environmental engineering subjects. So apart from this, for individual industries also we have certain discharge standards. Okay. This is a typical, how a effluent treatment plant or a sewage treatment plant looks like. It starts with we can broadly classify this treatment system into three parts. That is physical treatment, followed by a chemical treatment, and then biological treatment, or probably finally a tertiary treatment. Okay. So this is a typical, photograph of a treatment plant or a biological treatment system. This is basically a treatment plant of a local body. Very interestingly, we have very beautiful treatment plants in Bangalore. So probably you can visit some of the treatment plants, particularly the treatment plants, sewage treatment plants of the BWSSP, the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewerage Board. They have about I think 18 sewerage treatment plants throughout the Bangalore. Very, they're all heart of technology treatment plants. You can probably visit some of these treatment plants to understand the technology of how they are working under. Okay. This is the biological treatments plant of a treatment plant. Again, this is also a part of a biological treatment system of a treatment plant. So the problem is, this is the problem actually, in any industry or local bodies, particularly in the rural sector and all, the municipal corporations or the town panchayat limits and all, the treatment plants are generally neglected. This is the kind of treatment, how the treatment plant are being maintained. There will not be pumps. The pumps are already, there is no uh, the pump itself. You can see a lot of weed growth. You cannot even go near the treatment plant itself. This is why there is a problem in the implementation of the water rules. Okay. This probably, I don't know how many would have visited this place. This place is located very close to Bangalore actually. In fact, this photograph is from a place called Bairamangala. Bidadi. Many of you would have visited Bidadi. And then if you take a left turn towards this innovative city, film city in Bidadi, just after that, there is a place called Bairamangala. Bangalore actually, the sewage from Bangalore, uh, uh, roughly to give you an idea, Bangalore generates about 1,200 to 1,300 MLD, million liters per day of sewage, out of which about 50% goes towards the Rushabhavati Valley or V Valley or the Kengeri, what you see, no, the Kengeri Valley and another 50% goes towards the K&C Valley or the Kormangla Chelagatti Valley or the Bellandur Lake. Okay. So this is a photograph towards the V Valley. Actually, there is a place called Bairamangala where the V Valley sewage enters. So you can see a lot of foam formation, froth formation, and same kind of thing you can see on the other side of Bangalore also. This is a photograph from the downstream of the Belandur Lake. We can see a lot of foam, which is basically a pollutant. So we'll come to that why this foam is being formed. This is again the outlet of the Belandur Lake. Okay, Belandur Lake weir outlet. So you can see, lot of tarry residue you can see on the at the ground. Okay, these all because of the pollutants. Many may wonder why there is a lot of foam problem and all. Basically, this is due to the change in the lifestyle of the human being. Earlier there were not lot of surfactants or the soaps which we were using. Okay, so the lifestyle has changed. Nowadays we are using lot of soaps, lot of detergents, and there is lot of phosphorus. Phosphorus is the one of the basic pollutant which is resulting in all these pollution problems and all. This has been identified and a lot of action plans have been done actually. Okay, you may ask what BWSSP are the it's doing. In fact, BWSSP has got very excellent treatment plants. The problem is all the sewage which is being generated throughout the city is not being taken to the treatment plants. There are certain missing links. There are certain individual areas from which the effluent is directly joining the sewage is directly joining the drains, and then finally into the lakes, resulting in the lake pollution and all. So if all the sewage generated in the city is taken to the sewage treatment plants, probably this problem will be solved. In fact, BWSP is aiming at creating zero sewage to the stormwater drains by 2025. So hopefully this problem may be solved in next another 5 years down the line. Okay. So other problem is discharge, illegal discharge by the industries. Like they put some pipelines and somehow they discharge without our notice, which results in stagnation of effluent somewhere in the downstream areas, resulting in the water pollution. So this is one indicator of water pollution. You can just observe the lakes. Any lake you observe, if you can see the growth of these phytoplanktons on the, or what we call the elephant grass, or the weeds, okay, on the corners, this indicates the pollution of the lake. So it says this slowly starts extending towards the center, and the whole lake will be, after few days, the whole lake will be covered with the weeds. Okay, this is basically the because of the rich nutrients which is from the discharge of sewage and effluents. Okay. uh, in fact, we have been interested in monitoring of rivers as well as water quality of the lakes and all, which we are regularly doing. Every month we are monitoring the lake water quality as well as the river water quality throughout the state, as well as in the country. Other state pollution control boards are doing. We are classifying the lakes based on the quality of the water. Probably this you can see in our, please visit our website to understand more about what are these different classification of lakes and all. This is again the classification of lakes, again you can witness in our this one. So this is about the water pollution. Okay. And then we have one more act, as I said, to control and prevent the air pollution, which was introduced in the year 1981. So its basic objective is to prevent and control and abate the air pollution. Okay. So air pollution, we have, see, the major source of air pollution, you may think that it is from the industries, but it's not so. Actually, the major air pollution is not from industries. It is the vehicular pollution which is the major one. But actually, the vehicular pollution, the implementation of control of vehicular pollution has been entrusted to the motor vehicle department. It comes under the Motor Vehicle Act. Okay. The Pollution Control Board is implementing the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Prevention and Control of Pollution Act in the industries. Okay. So these are some of the important clauses. Here also we have the functions which have been entrusted to the state boards. And then there is a clause like each industry need to have a license from the Pollution Control Board before establishing any air pollution source. and we can give certain directions to any persons. And there are certain penalty provisions in the Air Act also, which probably you may not need at this point of time. This is an interesting study which KSPCB did actually with the help of TERI, which is a premier institute in the environmental field. This study was done in the year 2007 to 2009. This study was conducted to find out who is the culprit in terms of air pollution in Bangalore. So it said 22%, nearly 42% of our air pollution contribution is from the transport sector, that is from the vehicles, and then the road dust, okay, and then the domestic. You can see the industries contribute to just about 14%, okay. It is not even one third of the transport sector, okay. So that's why I'm telling the major culprit for the air pollution is the transport sector. In fact, after that, the government took so many initiatives. They said that there were a lot of think tanks on how to control the pollution from the transport and all. Still studies are going on, okay. So the best example is introduction of the new standards. Probably you would have heard about the BS4 and then BS5 standards, which are applicable from the April, okay. And then we have something called the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, which we are supposed to maintain, okay. We have air quality standards for residential, industrial, residential and other areas, as well as separate standards for ecologically sensitive areas, okay. We have standards for sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, the particulate matter, particularly of size less than 10 microns and less than 2.5 microns, which are basically which create health problems, okay. And then we have standards for ozone. Apart from that, we have other standards, like there are about 12 parameters including carbon monoxide, which in fact I have not displayed here. You can get it on our website also. Carbon monoxide is there, benzene is there, and there are other certain lead is there. So there are certain standards to be maintained, okay. And in fact, we have certain air pollution or air monitoring stations which we are um monitoring. This a one photo of a ambient CAAQM on the left side. What you can see, this is a continuous ambient air quality monitoring stations. We have around 31 monitoring stations throughout the state. About all districts, we are installing this. In Bangalore itself, we have 10 CAAQM stations where we are monitoring the ambient air quality. We have certain mobile CAAQM stations, and then we have some noise monitoring stations. Probably you would have heard about the noise monitoring being done by pollution control board during the recent Diwali and all, which results were published in newspapers. So this is being done by us. We have something called stack monitoring kits for monitoring the emissions from the industries, okay. This all being done by us. This is a photograph of how a air pollution control system looks like in an industry. So we generally stipulate certain pollution control equipments to be provided by the industry based on the type of industry, as well as the type of pollutant or the type of fuel which they are using. For example, this is basically a lead melting industry. You can see there is a dust collector here, there is a scrubber here, and there is a back filter here. These are all air pollution control equipments. Probably if you have a subject on air pollution, you will be studying on all these things. Apart from that, there will be something called as chimney, okay, or the exhaust or the chimney. Even the chimney height is also stipulated to see that the pollutants are easily dispersed into the atmosphere, so that there will not be any concentration on the ground level, okay. All these things will be stipulated by the pollution control board, okay. This is one more pictorial view of how pollution control equipments look like. So this is a photograph of the stack monitoring. You can see these two people checking the emissions, as I said, in the stack. This is being done by us under the Air Act. This is typically a photograph of a stone crusher. You get you have seen the roadside jelly and all, no, which we use for construction, of the roads as well the buildings and all. This is basically a stone crusher. Even there also they need to provide the pollution control equipments like this to prevent the air pollution or the fugitive dust. We have something called the air quality index. Probably you would have read about this in the newspapers. We have this air quality index is basically it is calculated considering the pollutants such as the PM10, PM2.5, SO2 and NOx. So considering all these parameters, the index is a number actually. This air quality index is being calculated by the government, okay, which we are doing actually. So the air quality index, if it is something like less than 50, we consider as the air quality as a good, then 50 to 100 satisfactory. Likewise, if it is more than 400, this will be considered as very severe, that is very bad. In fact, the Delhi's air quality will be, in most of the times, it will be in the range of severe or very poor. Okay. One more important thing you have to understand is air quality is very area specific. The amount of air pollution you cause in Bangalore, if you cause equal amount of air pollution in Delhi, the effect will be different because of the climatic conditions. Delhi is very cold, that. So wherever the air pollution is very bad in cold climates, that you have to understand, because of poor mixing. Okay. Wherever the mixing height, we call it as minimum mixing height or minimum mixing depth, MMD. So wherever MMD is less, even the air quality will be very poor. So it combines with the fog in the air, and which results in smog, which also creates in poor air quality index in such places. Okay. Fortunately, in Bangalore, in today's scenario, the Bangalore air quality is either good or satisfactory, which is a very encouraging fact. So how do you know, as a student or a common man, how do you know about the air quality? So it is very simple. So you have the Google Play, no? Google Play app is there in our smartphones. You can download an app called Sameer, SAMEER. Okay, you can just note down this. This is an app which has been developed by the Central Pollution Control Board. So please download this. It's a free app. So with this app, actually, you can get the air quality or the air quality index of any city in the country. Okay, wherever the stations are installed, we can see the air quality. Okay, so please download this, and you can start using, so that you can understand the air quality. So this is about, we covered the Water Act, salient features of Water Act, and then salient features of Air Act. Then we have the Environment Protection Act, which, as I said, this is considered as an umbrella act. Uh, there are certain discharge standards which are stipulated under this act. There are certain area specific standards. For example, the coastal areas, there is something called a coastal regulation zone. Okay. For hilly areas, there are for example, Doon Valley, Dehradun, there are certain separate standards which have been stipulated. For Mahabaleshwar, it's a beautiful place in hill station in Maharashtra. Okay, there are certain separate standards which are stipulated. Likewise, we have different area specific standards. Okay, and then we have industry based standards. Like for example, for petrochemical there will be some separate standards, cement industry separate standards, pharmaceutical separate standards, like that. Okay, there are load and mass based standards, and the departments, the pollution control board is empowered to give certain directions to the industries under this act. And there are certain penalties which are being introduced. There is something called environment statement which the industries have to submit. It's like a audit. Every industry, they make this financial audit every year, they make this balance sheet. No, similarly, the industries have to do a environmental balance sheet every year. So they have to find out how much was the pollution which was created last year, and how much is the pollution created this year. What was the water consumption, wastewater generation last year, this year, likewise. Okay, this is called as environmental statement, which they have to prepare and submit to the pollution control boards. You may wonder, what is this fine of 1 lakh and all, which is very, very less. In fact, now the government has enacted a draft notification, and this act is being which is being amended. Actually, the fine clause is being from 1 crore, from 1 lakh, it is being changed to 1 crore. Okay, which is being the act is being made very stringent now. So this is one more important notification which you have to understand probably. This is called as Environmental Impact Assessment Notification 2006, wherein there are certain category of projects or polluting projects or which have more environmental impact. Okay, such projects they have to obtain clearance from the government. Okay, the projects have been classified into category A and category B. Category A projects basically they need to obtain clearance from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change from New Delhi. And category B projects, we have something called State Environment Impact Assessment Authority in each state. So there they need to obtain the clearances. Okay. And then there is something called EIA report or Environment Impact Assessment Studies. Probably this also you will be studying in your curriculum. Okay. So this there are category A projects which need to assess the environmental impact which is caused due to the setting of that project. Okay, the study has to be conducted. Of course, there are different methods in which the EIA studies are conducted. That itself altogether is a major subject which will not be dealing with that. And there is something called public consultation or environmental public hearing. Okay, so like there are certain projects which need to go through this environment public hearing process. Like the government has to take into consideration the opinion of the local public where the project is being set up. Okay, so before giving permission for setting up of this such kind of projects, very recently you would have in the newspapers and all, you would have heard about like the government enacting a new 2020 notification of the EIA. Okay, 2020 there was an amendment. The draft was published in this one. In fact, the act is the 2020 notification is yet to be issued, because there was a lot of public outcry, particularly from the environmentalists, because the government wanted to remove certain hindrances. For example, public hearing was a major hindrance for many projects. There will be a lot of public opposition wherever you go. Any project, there will be objection from the public, which was delaying the implementation of the projects. Government wanted to ease these things to avoid public consultation for certain category of projects. And finally, there was a lot of environmentalists. Big outcry was there, and finally, still it is under draft stage. It is yet to be implemented. These are certain categories of projects which require prior environmental clearance from the government. As I said, major projects like mining, the metallurgical, petroleum projects, river valley projects, even thermal power projects, cement, sugars, industrial township, the common effluent treatment plants or the common waste treatment plants. Okay, you may wonder, even the building projects or the construction projects which are very big building projects, no, something like 50,000 square meters of built up area, and they need to go through this environmental impact assessment notification process, and they also need to have the environmental clearance. Okay, so with this we have covered about four. I think we have another 10 minutes time, so I'll be quickly running through another 4-5 acts and rules which we are implementing. This is one more act which is called as Hazardous and Other Waste Rules 2016. Okay, basically hazardous waste means the rule says which are the acts, the wastes which are highly toxic, reactive, flammable. Okay, they have given a definition. So all kind of wastes are considered as the hazardous waste. Okay, this basically you can see the wastes of battery. There is one data. Can you mute it? Data, can you mute your 0.2 million tons of hazardous waste? And some hazardous wastes are landfillable. That means you cannot reuse it. In hazardous waste also we have three options. First option is recycle it as far as possible. If it is not possible, try to incinerate it, burn it, so that you will not end up in landfill. If these two options are not viable, final option is this landfilling. So this is the scenario in India. In fact, the major hazardous waste generate countries, states are Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Andhra Pradesh, where we have a lot of chemical and pharmaceutical industries. We have something called as this TSDF, or secured landfills, the engineered landfills for the disposal of this hazardous waste. We have two in Karnataka also, okay, which probably will learn in the later stage. This is Karnataka scenario. As I said, we have two TSDFs, we have 6 incineration units, and there are a lot of co-processing units. Even co-processing means there are certain industries, for example, cement industries. They need fuel for the furnace, okay, for burning the lime to form the cement, okay. So there are we can use certain hazardous waste as a fuel for the industry. So cement industries have been authorized to use certain hazardous waste for the burning process. So these things I will be skipping what this hazardous waste means, and what are all these are certain categories of hazardous waste where it is generated. In almost all industries, these hazardous wastes are generated. Okay, this detail will not be going through, which you can definitely get in your website. In fact, the industries, as I said, the occupier or the generator of the hazardous waste, the major role is to try to prevent the waste generation. If not possible, try to minimize it, try to reuse it, recycle it. If nothing is possible, finally the safe disposal. Okay. So these are certain responsibilities which again I will not be. There are certain rules of how to transport the waste, and how to what all these, how the hazardous waste stored in an industry. There are certain rules and regulations which we have stipulated from the Central Pollution Control Board, which they have to follow. Like for example, the waste has to be stored on the chemical resistance flooring, so that there will not be any leakage. Even if there is a leakage of waste, there should not be any contamination of the ground. Okay, proper designated areas have to be earmarked for the storage of hazardous waste. There is one photo like that. We have different the wastes have been segregated to different things. Again, waste stored in carbides, but this is not a proper method of storage, because these wastes are stored outside the in the open sun, which is not correct actually. Okay, again, this is one more ill practice or bad practice of storing the hazardous waste. The waste are dumped in a corner without any proper segregation and all. You can see a lot of leakage of the waste, which is again, it's a bad practice of storage of hazardous waste, which is not this is again a bad practice of storage. Again, waste stored outside in an open area. So these are all instances of violation of the hazardous waste rules. The open dumping of hazardous waste, this also we have witnessed. Actually, we have filed a case against an industry for disposing this kind of hazardous waste on the open land. Okay, open burning of hazardous waste, this is basically a rubber waste which was burnt in a open area by one industry. Again, the industry was booked for the violation. This again this is the photograph of a TSDF, or a secured landfill, or an engineered landfill. As I said, this is a landfill which is located in Haroli. Probably as students, I recommend you to visit some of these TSDFs, or the secured landfills, to understand how they work and how they are designed. Okay, you can see this is an engineered landfill which has got there will be 2 to 3 layers of impervious layers. There will be clay layer, followed by an engineered plastic layer, and then the HDPE layer. So these are all different layers upon which the waste will be filled, and finally this is how the waste will be sealed. Okay, so this is after the sealing of the waste, filling and sealing. You can see a vent here provided for the escape of the toxic gases or the flammable gases which may be generated due to reactions inside the cell. We have, as I said, the e-waste rules, or the rules for the electronic waste. electronic waste is a very recent trend actually, which came maybe from the past 10-15 years, which has become a major problem now. Okay. So any electrical and electronic equipment is considered as a e-waste. So we can see there are the rule stipulates which are all the e-wastes and all. We can see the CPUs, or we can see even the printers, the cartridges, the telephones, okay, the cardless phones, our mobile phones. So they all come under the electronic waste category. Okay. And then even the consumer electronics like television sets, refrigerators. So all these things, the fluorescent CFL lamps, okay, they are all categorized under e-waste rules, considered as e-waste, and there are certain rules and regulations which have to be followed in proper disposal of these wastes. Okay. So some of the salient features of the rules, it says all waste have to be channelized through proper waste recyclers and refurbishers. There are certain rules and regulations and responsibilities fixed on the bulk consumers, dealers, even the e-retailers like Amazon or the Flipkart and all. They have certain responsible rules to be followed. Even the manufacturers, there is something called as extended producer responsibility. Like for example, the mobile phone manufacturer like Samsung or Apple, there are certain responsibilities like you need to have a system of collecting back the used phones. Okay. That system has been put in place. That's why nowadays you can see most of the telephone companies or the telephone retailers, they offer you the buyback system with a best price. They say bring back your phone, we'll give you the best price, because a targets have been fixed to them for collecting the used phones. Okay. And then even you can see certain information on your so next time when you buy this the telephone, mobile phone, then there is on how to dispose the phone after the usage. Okay. So there will be certain guidelines and all. Okay. So that is about plastic waste. Plastic somebody is okay, thank you. Um, this plastic waste management rules, again, which is very important. This is the total quantity of plastic which is on Earth. Plastic was invented somewhere in 1908, actually, first plastic. You all know plastic requires about 300, minimum 300 to 400 years for degradation. This plastic which was invented about 100 exists on okay. The plastic is a problem because of this kind of management. This improper our solid waste. Okay. So wherever we find some water body or a canal, the waste will be just thrown there so that it is easily carried out. Okay. So this ill practice is causing the which is a major problem resulting in the plastic problem. Again, it's again improper disposal of plastic, which is um, resulting there. In fact, we have the plastic waste management rules enacted by government of India, which says the thickness of the plastic bag manufactured in the country shall not be less than 50 microns. Okay, minimum thickness should be 50 microns so that the bag can be recycled further. Any plastic bag or a plastic sheet. Okay, and it says only specific colorants have to be used as per IS standards, and recycled plastic shall not be used for the for the packing of foods. And generators have to ensure proper segregation. And then there are brand owners which ensure extended producer responsibility. Again, producer responsibility is there. Recently the Coca-Cola introduced the t-shirts made of the plastic waste, because it has been mandated by the government that the 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 uh, the the manufacturer, the brand owner, has to collect back their the plastic waste. Coca-Cola recently they started collecting black their plastic waste and produce T-shirts so that to ensure the extended producer responsibility, marking of the bags and registration. But one important thing is, apart from all these things, Karnataka has gone one step further. In fact, in Karnataka, all these things have already been banned by the notification in the year 2016. Like, for example, plastic carry bags. Though in the country, the Indian government allows it, in Karnataka, it is already banned actually. Carry bags are banned, plastic banners, plastic bundings, flex, all these things, plastic spoons, cups, all these things are already banned in Karnataka. That's why probably you cannot find these things, or even if you find, they are very, very scarcely. Very, there is a big scarcity of availability of these products. Okay, the single-use plastics, particularly these things are banned. The carry bags, the cups, these kind of bags, cups, and then the straws are banned actually. There is a thought of banning this water bottles also, but because of this prevailing cloak, this situation of COVID-19, the government is going easy on that. Okay, there is something called as the plastic microbeads, which are generally, this is a very recent trend, a recent phenomenon of plastic pollution. You can see on your scrubs or even in the toothpaste and all these contain, some of them contains the plastic microbeads. Okay, uh, uh, for example, there is a plastic microbead which is found in the the scrub, the body scrub which we are using. Okay, so which also cause the water pollution. So we have to stop whenever you go for a purchase next time. Please see whether the plastic microbeads are present in that. So if it is there, you try to avoid it. Okay. So then we have this biomedical waste rules, which is applicable to the hospitals and all. Any waste which is generated in the treatment and immunization or diagnosis are considered as the biomedical waste. Basically, anything which is generated in hospital is not a biomedical waste. About 80% are non-infectious general waste. Only about 20% are actual infectious waste. And in fact, the biomedical waste rules mandates certain things to be followed by the healthcare establishments or the hospitals. Okay, these are all the problems related due to improper handling and management of the biomedical waste. There are certain diseases which may be caused. There are chances of air pollution, infection, and then water pollution also may be caused due to the improper management of the biomedical waste. Okay. This is a guideline given by the government about in the biomedical waste, about the how to segregate the waste. So in the hospital, next time when you go, you can see different kinds of bins placed in the wards or your the treatment cabin. So this yellow color bin is for all the infectious waste, and then red color bin is for the recyclable plastic waste. Next time when you visit an hospital, hope you don't go there, but by chance if you visit there, please try to observe all these things. There will be separate bin for a for the sharps and all. There will be separate bin for the metals, recyclable metals. These things you can probably observe. This is a place where the biomedical wastes are incinerated. I think I will skip all these things, how the biomedical wastes are handled actually. Okay, so the plastic wastes are basically actually they are all very high quality wastes, high value wastes actually. They are basically, they are disinfected, autoclaved, and then they are shredded, and then they are recycled actually. All other infectious waste are burned in the incinerators. Okay, this is also a area of interest. Probably you can as a students, you can visit some of the biomedical waste management facilities. You can even take up a project on this. Okay, and then finally, I'll come to this solid waste management rules 2016, uh, which is basically applicable for all these the local bodies, the municipalities or the BBMP or the corporations and all. So solid waste is something which is generated in almost all the it includes commercial waste, residential waste, sanitary waste, institutions like colleges and all, markets, and all waste except the waste which are generated like biomedical waste, because we have a separate rule for that. Battery waste we have a separate rule, radioactive waste we have separate rules. So all other wastes are considered as solid waste and covered under the solid waste management rules. um, this one. And then this is the typical composition of solid waste in India and in world. Basically in India we have lesser of inorganic portion, whereas if you consider the whole world, it has got more of the inorganic portion. Okay. So in urban India itself generates about 2 lakh tons of solid waste every day. In Bangalore itself, the generation of solid waste is something like about 6,000 tons per day. Okay, it is 6,000 tons per day in the general regular days, and on the next days of the festivals and all, on the days next to the festivals, the generation is something like 8,000. Okay, it's because of our culture, or the way we generate the waste during festivals. This is the municipal generation, typical municipal solid waste generation, per capita generation in various countries and all. You can see in the developed countries the generation, per capita generation, is very high as more than 1.5 kgs per day per person, whereas in countries like India and all, it is less than 1 kg. We can see Indian average is something like 0.5 to 1 kg per day. Okay. So as our lifestyle increases, the solid waste generation is also increases. This is one more pictorial representation of per capita generation. This is a representation of how so this is the management approach of how the solid waste is managed. So as I said, the first option is to prevent the generation of solid waste. If there is no option, then recycling and composting. And then if there is no option, final option is either go for combustion, like waste to energy plants, or landfilling. Okay. In the rules, in fact, they have given different duties and responsibilities for all the different the waste generators, the local bodies, and the government organizations. Rules and regulations, the responsibilities have been fixed. For example, some of the responsibilities, like segregation of waste into biodegradable, non-biodegradable, and the domestic hazardous waste, like even in domestic sector also, we generate the biomedical waste, we generate the pesticide cans. For example, our Harpic or our insecticide cans, the heat spray, whatever we use, no, they are all domestic hazardous waste. So we are supposed to segregate them before handing over to the municipalities. And then sanitary waste have to be wrapped in a separate cover. um, in fact, the C&D waste, the construction and demolition waste, has to be managed separately as per the rules. And then you are not supposed to burn or litter the generator solid waste. And the government can fix certain solid waste management fees, probably, which those who are residing in BBMP, you will be already witnessing it, which we are already paying along with our property tax. And you need to take permission from the government, from the local body. If you are arranging a function where more than 100 people are assembled, you need to pay for some fees to the government for the management of the waste. Okay. Likewise, lot of duties and responsibilities are fixed, and each and every department has been given certain the responsibilities. Like for example, Ministry of Environment and Forests has been entrusted with overall monitoring and implementation of the rules. Ministry of Urban and Urban Development has been entrusted with certain rules and regulations, certain responsibilities. Ministry of Fertilizers, they are supposed to market or see that the compost which is generated by the municipalities from the municipal waste is properly marketed. Agriculture, Ministry of Agriculture has been given this one. Ministry of Power, they are supposed to encourage the waste to energy plants. Okay. Ministry of Non-Renewable Energy, again they are supposed to encourage the waste to energy projects. Central Pollution Control Board, which is a rule making body. State Pollution Control Board, we are supposed to monitor the implementation of the rules and the monitor the landfill sites and all. Okay. And then the Deputy Commissioner of the district, he is supposed to identify the site for the management of the solid waste, and as well as the solid waste disposal sites. Okay, this is a scenario of waste management in Karnataka. There are so many local bodies in Karnataka. We have 279. However, the rules stipulate certain time schedule and guidelines for identification of landfills, establishment of the reprocessing sites and all. But somehow still there are still gray spots. Actually, we are not able to completely comply with the rules and regulations. There are so many other complications. For example, identifying a landfill site is not a very easy task. Even Bangalore is facing a lot of problem, because the moment you go to some place, to a rural area, they say, why do you bring your waste to here? Okay, there is something probably you would have heard called a NIMBY syndrome. That is, not in my backyard. Why I should take your waste in my backyard? Okay, so that problem, that scenario is existing everywhere. So that's why there is a delay in implementation of the rules. So this is how this is already discussed. This again, the MSW rules stipulates the same thing. Try to reduce the waste. If not, try to recycle it. Try to compost it if it is a compostable material. If nothing is there, try to recover the energy, waste to energy plants. Okay, and then try to, if nothing is happening, finally, if the inert materials are there, there is no other option but to go for a engineered landfill. Okay, I think with this I'll end up my session. So for further information, you can visit these websites, CPCB, MOEF, or KSPCB. Okay, you can get a lot of information. So I hope I have done justice in the past 1.5 hours. As I said, it's a very wide topic, probably covering all these things in 1.5 hours. I also felt it difficult, but somehow I tried to squeeze in most of the information in the available time. With this, thank you very much.